Sorry about that. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest for our discussion tonight, and someone who I call a dear friend, Miguel Rojas-Sotelo. Miguel Rojas-Sotelo is an art historian, visual artist, media activist, scholar, and curator. He is the director of the North Carolina Latin American Film Festival and the founder of Watertown's Environmental Film and Arts Festival in China. He currently works and teaches at the Duke University Center for International and Global Studies and Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. And he's also affiliated with the Consortium in Latin American and Caribbean Studies with UNC Chapel Hill. Miguel is a doctor, PhD in Visual Studies, Contemporary Art and Cultural Theory, with an MA in Modern and Contemporary Art from the University of Pittsburgh and an MFA in Visual Arts from the Universidad de los Andes. Miguel was the Colombian Ministry of Culture's first visual arts director from 1997 to 2001, where he worked building participatory cultural policy. And he has worked independently as a filmmaker, curator, author, and critic ever since. Welcome, bienvenido, Miguel.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, Maria, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here in the museum. Unfortunately, we cannot be there in the special space in the museum, the North Carolina Art Museum, a lovely space that we all treasure so much and that we celebrate having. But as we cannot have it, we are here in this other black space, other black boxes for us, the people working in cinema. And I'm very glad, I'm very happy to be invited to be part of this event. And thank you everybody for joining on a Friday evening to discuss this film. And I always try to do like a little introduction to a film before watching the film, but you already saw the film, then it's quite a different kind of dynamic. But I can just say a couple of things. I can say that in Mexico in 1985, everything trembled. At the time, Miguel de la Madrid was president. He was one of the last presidents representing the hegemonic rule of the PRI, the Institutional Revolutionary Party that had, controlled the country for 7 decades after the Mexican Revolution in 1910, and also was considered one of the first presidents on the left that opened the doors for economic neoliberalism, facing lots of criticisms. And that woke up on the early morning of September 1985, 7:50 a.m. With the largest earthquake that the Mexico area had in the past 100 years, with a magnitude of 8.0 on the Richter scale and a maximum of 9 in the mercantile intensity. A violent earthquake that caused serious damage to the greater Mexico area, and that's accounted for more than 5,000 people. That year, many other things happened, right? Many events, including some that are really interesting. I just want to remind you that in November 26, the first Mexican astronaut reached the space. He joined the STS-61B mission, Rodolfo Neri Vela, somehow accomplishing what, of the things you saw in the film, that Mexicans were already on the space, right? That aliens and Mexicans are somehow of one sort, that a space travel and Mexican ancestry is just one thing. Then that was a special thing. And of course, in Christmas Eve, just a few days from now, 1985, the heist of the century at the National Museum of Anthropology. And that's exactly the story, this drama that you saw, directed by the young Mexican director Alonso Ruizpalacios. He's quite young. He was born in 1978. This is his second film after a very important film he produced in 2014, Güeros. Was produced and co-written by him and Manuel Alcalá, an important also script writer in Mexico, and selected to represent Mexico in the 68 Berlin International Film Festival when it won the Silver Bear for Best Screenplay. Also, this film, as you saw it, and probably some of you asked when you were watching the streaming, why YouTube was there involved, right? It's like something that is new for many of us, playing a film and suddenly seeing, not from YouTube, right? But seeing YouTube in the credits. Actually, this film is the first film bought by YouTube in their new, let's say, portfolio of global cinema. From Latin America. Then actually is an important film because of that too, and very hard film to get for these kinds of spaces because the negotiations get really complicated. But at the center of the film, a major, let's say, part of the film is this structure that I have here behind me. That is this beautiful architectural piece, the National Museum of Anthropology, right? That is considered itself a modern national treasure, a symbol of the identity of New Mexico, but also is a place in which these ideas, ideological and scientific and political ideas, are all condensed, right? It's a place that actually hosts the ancestral history of Mexico, but in this kind of a shape, almost space-like shape. It's good to remember that Octavio Paz, the famous Mexican critic, was very highly critic of the museum, of this museum itself, because he said that this museum, and I will quote what Paz said, it brings exaltation and glorification to the Mexico Tenochtitlan, transforming this Museum of Anthropology into a temple, and end quote. Then he criticized the fact that the museum becomes not a space of reflection, but a sacred space that, as a good sacred space, a mausoleum almost like can be the object of robbery, right? And we saw that in the film. Then to start this conversation, I'm just going to throw some things out there because the idea is to have an interactive conversation, right? A space to debrief and to talk about issues on the side of form, but on the side of content too, in this film club. Then just to start, right, the museum, right? Museum, a mausoleum, a cabinet of curiosities, a cave of looters, right? All these adjectives, right? A space of the creation of identity, both national identity, and also in this case of the film, a sort of coming to age, fixing identity or misidentity, boy to man, something like that going on in the film. A museum as the representation of a national success, right? The history of a nation, the idea of success, right? Also as part of the creation of the middle class, right? Is what any modern nation wants, and that is depicted here in this film too. A museum as a space of exchange, a space of a market space, right? A space of a spectacle, business. We see here this thing too. Then the museum, right, is the title of this film that Alonso Ruizpalacios offered us to start this conversation. Then let's leave it like that, and then we start talking. I think the microphones are open, or we do it through the chat. Let's see. I think we have chat, yes. Exactly, we have Lynn Walter says, El Museo Nacional de Antropología is a truly amazing and beautiful physical space, and something that I was thinking about during the movie. How can people steal things that had stolen that to be put into a museum? Thank you, Lynn, for that has been stolen. Thank you for that correction. I think that's one of the issues in this film, right? Is the sacredness of the spaces, right? The idea of a museum as a temple, or a museum as a mausoleum, right? That is a space that has this issue of distance, right? It creates this supposed action of proximity, right? You go to a museum and you feel that you are close to something that is really valuable, but you cannot touch it, right? Because it's the not touch policy, right? And in the film we see that, right? How this boy cannot touch, and they say, don't touch, right? And he wants to touch. This is an issue of the impossibility of a body to be completed. And this happens in temples, right? You don't want to touch, but it's so seductive aesthetically, right? What is invested in these objects or in these spaces of sublimation, right? The idea of beauty, right? Beauty that first happens in the modern world, in our experience in the temples, right, in the cathedrals, space of sublimation, right, a moment to rise our spirits and get closer to the divine, and the entire idea of the modern aesthetic, the art, las bellas artes, right, the visual arts, and are connected to this idea of sublimation, right? It's this Kantian idea of that art is a vehicle for the better, right? To bring us close to the divine. Then here we see that, right? We want that, and that has a value, right? An exchange value. And where is it, right? It's in this place, right? And let's do something with it. And I think that's one of the big forces behind the film somehow. Susan Crescendo says, can you tell us how closely the movie kept to the actual event, and how did it end for the two young men? Okay, yeah, actually, Ruizpalacios and his co-writer, Manuel Alcalá, actually Manuel Alcalá is the son of an important investigative reporter. Actually, his two parents are journalists, and he's a writer, but he's fascinated with this, being close to the fact he researches a lot what he writes, and in this case, the film is based on the real issues, right? The heist that was committed by Charlie Perches Trevino, and Ramon Sardina Garcia. And it depicts the facts in a close way, I will say. I think they had, of course, liberty in the way they did it, right? Because this has been widely shared in Mexico because of, a fascination with this story, of course. Why? On one side, because, they were successful in doing this, right? A couple of young men in the mid-20s, dropouts from a university, from the upper middle class, not even middle class, but upper middle class, well-off kids from the suburbs of Mexico City. People that didn't want, or didn't have to do something like this, then that captured the imagination of many. And I think that's a big part of what the film was made to. We can talk about that, how these Mexican films are trying to tell stories for the larger middle class, right? It's actually part of what Mexican cinema is doing lately, very successfully, I will say. And the film tries to tell the story from the perspective of these two men. There is some accounts by Charlie, by Carlos, who was at the end caught. In this case is the figure of Gael Garcia Bernal. The other, he was never caught, actually is on the loose still. They, to make the story short, 144 pieces were stolen in 1985, in Christmas Eve 1985. By 1989, 4 years after, 122 pieces were recovered. Carlos purchased Charlie was caught by the police because he was somehow snitched by narco trafficker, or to be a narco trafficker, a person dealing with drugs. Then he got to know Charlie, as we saw in the film. Actually, in the film, he doesn't meet any narco in particular, but he does in real life. And this guy tells the police, in order to make an arrangement with the police, that he knows one of the perpetrators of the heist, and he is caught. He goes to jail. A month after being in jail, he is murdered in jail. And his companion, Ramon Sardina, was never found at this point. Nobody knows where he is. He had 7 important pieces hidden. Those pieces were not recovered, and 122 were returned because they were actually hidden in one closet in Charlie's house, as the film loosely shows. That's the story, more or less. I think Maria knows more about the story too, if she wants to.
So, could I ask a question?
Please, Elizabeth,
Okay.
of course.
So at the very end, when well, I guess Charlie is the real person, but I forget what his name was in the movie. But anyway, so this car pulls up in front of the museum, and it looks like it's being driven by his father. Was that correct? And the two thieves jump out. They go into the museum, but was that that was his dad that was driving them?
Yeah, in the movie, yes. Juan's father.
They were just gonna drop the things off, and then he was gonna drive them to the airport or something. Is that what the deal was?
Yeah, in the film, right. This is part of the story, right? In the story, in the film, they at the end return the pieces, right? And one of them, Charlie, gives himself out to the police, and is the father, Juan's father, who takes them. But yeah, in reality, that doesn't happen.
That didn't happen.
No, that didn't. Actually, one of Charlie's, Juan's brothers, goes also to jail for this because, I mean, he's the youngest of a middle class family. His father, yes, is a doctor. He is the youngest of I think four. His older brother and one of his sisters are indicted for supporting, him through the years. Minor charges because they were not really involved. But yeah, in this case, there is also this relationship, this difficult relationship in this upper middle class families in which the father of Juan, in this case, is asking him a lot. He wants him to succeed, right, to be successful. He's a doctor. He's becoming a veterinarian. We see the other character, Ramon, in the real life, having also a relationship with his father. And that is a different kind of relationship, but they are very attached, right? They are good boys. I mean, they are children of their families. I mean, they don't have fractured families or terrible stories behind them as many of these bandits, historically will be depicted, right? They are normal kids, right, from suburbs. And that's a little bit part of it. It's the issue of success, pressure in the constitution of these new urbanized spaces. Mexico City at that point is one of the largest cities in the world. This is still today. It has been since the time of Tenochtitlan. But it's very hard to be someone, right, in a city as large as Mexico. And there's a lot of pressure on these kids from these families, for them to be successful. They give them everything to make that happen. And in this case, they are failing, right? Then there is this pressure there. And these father figures are important. One is strong, the other one is ill in their process of becoming. They have this trouble with this father figure.
Miguel, we also got another question in the chat from JC. How far should a filmmaker go from the truth of what happened when filming about a historic event? At least what I read, the articles were not taken back.
I say that, this is not a documentary film. This is a fictional film, right? And yes, we have a story, the story of the heist. And I think there is this fascination by the director and the scriptwriter and everybody involved in the film to try to depict some of these moments of the heist that are, I don't know, like triggers of sense, right? For example, that long scene that I will say is, is one of the very special montage, cinematic montage that we share with them when they are very carefully taking out of their bags these simple items, like in a Mission Impossible kind of thing or MacGyver kind of thing, right? All sorts of bells rung to produce, right, the sequence in which they take the casing out of one of these pieces, right, the mask. There is a lot of investment, cinematic investment, script writing investment, and then mise en scene, right, the shooting process to make this thing real, right, and for us to be there sharing with them and actually cheering, yes, do it, you're gonna make it, or no, don't do it. It's like a tense moment of reality in which we are invited to be part of it. Then I think that, here we see this investment in reality, how to process this almost in a documentary manner, right? We have to show how these kids did this, right? Right. Actually, at one point where we say the alarm is gonna, there was no alarm, and they are surprised to say, oh, nothing, there was no alarm, right? It's not Indiana Jones that a trap is gonna, booby trap is gonna happen, or Ocean's 11, like boom, something's gonna, you know, a huge thing with lasers and things. No, this is Mexico, 1985, right? This is, they are surprised too. I mean, and this is interesting, but there is this investment, cinematic investment, on doing something really close to reality. Also, they use some footage that is real footage, the footage of the TV host the day after, right, Christmas morning. That's real footage of you know, coming from the TV, you know, archives, in which they say a bunch of robbers, right, very professional people came last night and stole our treasure from the museum. That's a real footage. But this is a fictional film. It's not a documentary film. Then there is also Freeway, and that's fascinating, right? Following that scene of the casing, right, taking out this, we have this other series of, you will say, a little loose kind of play of images, like shots of they taking things like it, and you don't know as a spectator if this is, I mean, this is like some of these forensic films in which you are like checking things like a flash thing, but you don't know, you feel unease if it's like too sketchy, too dramatic, too like badly done, or it you know, it borders into the fantasy space. Because you know that they are like posing, and I mean, it's like playful kind of thing that takes you back to the fictional world, to fantasy, right? After the investment of doing it really real, and I like a lot that montage, that two sets of scenes back to back, right? One that in which you are invested, and the other one that is like more loose, kind of weird, because aesthetically also bring me to other things that we can talk later.
Miguel, I wanted to just bring up the, you know, when the film starts, that the caption that says, this story is a replica of the original, like that's something that really stuck out to me. So I also want to know what other people's thoughts are, what your thoughts are, and what everyone else's thoughts were on starting the film with that title.
A museum, a replica, a story based on real facts, but is just based on a replica is never what it is. Sometimes it's better. Actually, they play with the issue of the replica inside of the film too, a couple of times, with museums showing replicas, and then we don't know, we are not connoisseurs, then we say, oh, well, it's better than the real. Okay, it's the real. You know, it can be better. Then of course there's all sorts of play with that, and film brings that, right? Is the issue. I mean, nowadays with that, we are going over the board about hyper reality, 4K, 8K, 12K, right? That cinema can do better than reality. For simulating, replicating reality is just a play, and yeah, I like it too. Was very playful in that way. The way that it started.
Miriam, I did see your question. She wants to know, as a representative of the NCMA, how I view the museum's place and role, which is a great question. You know, I think I haven't made up my mind completely, because museums for me growing up were places where I learned about other cultures, was exposed to all these objects, all these paintings that I probably would not have had the opportunity to see in their original locations, or or travel to see these ancient artifacts in Egypt. And I think it has the power to educate, but I also have that like moral dilemma of how did these items get here? And that's actually really interesting. I can't speak on official terms on regarding the museum's stance on it, but I know that there has been conversation throughout different departments about acknowledging this and being transparent about this, especially with the current political climate. We're trying to show that transparency of like, we know some of these items came from, not very good, good manners and not in the best way, but, we want to acknowledge that and say, yeah, yes, these items got here, but we're trying to make this accessible to people, and yeah, there's some conversations being had, but nothing official yet. And I also want to say that Ray raised his hand. Ray, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question?
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, I just wanted to, I believe that the film, by sticking to the historical facts, but then taking license with it, makes it a much more powerful film. Because I think there's many themes, of course, but one of the central themes, for me anyway, was the idea that you had this not so young man who, he knows Mexican culture, his own culture. He knows all the gods, the goddesses. He can tell you the whole story of I don't know if it's pronounced Tlaloc, the 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 goddess, the water goddess that was actually brought to Mexico City, or the museum at the beginning. He can recite all that, but he's not really accepted, and so he's kind of in a strange place where he's constantly called Güero, which is not a very nice term. So he's not accepted by Mexican culture in general. And he doesn't want to accept his, I'll just say, like, Americanized bourgeois, path that his father wants him to be on. And so, he goes and then he does this thing that he thinks is going to make him some hero. And instead, of course, that's part of the whole story, is it's not what he thinks it is. But I mean, so you get to that kind of like, oh, there's lots of people in this country who have that same sort of like, they don't feel like, the government represents them, or whatever. I mean, you have that same sort of feeling going on right now in this country. But if you were trying to make just a pure documentary, I don't think he would have touched on all that. So I do think that, I do think they did a really great job of keeping it, sort of to the facts, but also then, making it much more about like the character of that type of person. Whether, that represents a lot of people in Mexico, I don't know, but, certainly that's more of a universal type of what he's going through is very universal.
Thank you, Ray. Yes, I agree. I agree with that 100%. I mean, at the moment when Charlie Juan was captured by the police, he was just turning 25, I think. I think he was 20, 21 when these guys, Ramon and Carlos, were doing this. Yes, this kind of idealizing of Mexican culture. I mean, we have to take this story back to of what Mexican culture is, right? Mexico, as most of the countries of the South that were conquered by Europeans in the 15th century, they lost, right, these memories, these ancestral memories. Mexico's 1910 revolution somehow brought back many of this the potential of these ancestral memories further in the consolidation of a new space, a new nation. Jose Vasconcelos, who was like the Minister of the Interior and then the first Minister of Culture and Education, wrote this famous piece called La Raza Cósmica, the cosmic race, in which he tries to connect the need of a nation to become modern, right? This is 1914 and 1918, after the war, the Revolutionary War of 1810, to come into terms with the past, right? A past that was the past of colonialism that they were trying to get rid of and try to bring the glories of the Aztec and Maya empires and connect them as a energy engine force of a new nation, a nation that had the possibility of coalesce all these different ethnicities into a new fifth race that is that cosmic race that Vasconcelos writes about, a race that is like no one on earth, is a new race. And that's also the force of the Institutional Revolutionary Party that got that idea, right, and created this imagined community, right, that is the modern Mexican community. And we have then art participating heavily on this, right? The famous muralists in the 1920s, 30s, 40s that actually became huge in the US too, right? Orozco, Siqueiros, Rivera, Pio Rivera, we had a beautiful exhibit of Rivera and Kahlo last year at the museum here, beautiful exhibit. And they were part of giving an image to this new nation, an industrialized nation, but that is built on this knowledge, of this ancestral knowledge. Then somehow a pride of knowing this. And in these kids, we have that. I mean, they despise the fact that the museum is this a space in which all these treasures are decontextualized from their locations. Actually, the film takes place, half of the film, outside of a concealed space. It goes, to Palenque and to these wonderful archaeological sites that Mexico have everywhere. Because the pieces somehow they belong to that space, right? But of course, it's a space that doesn't exist anymore. It's a space in the past, and that has now become a space of market, a space of spectacle, all the kinds of spectacle, right? And all sorts of levels of this spectacle are taking place there, right? Like the black market and real market of pieces. It's very interesting when they are stopped in the route to the country, and in a couple of instances they call these pieces artesanía. They are crafts. Who cares, right? Oh, we are surrounded by this. I mean, everybody does this. They are made, again, what Maria was saying, a copy, right? A replica, right? They are replicas, and they have a function, right? A function that is not only they have a function contextually, right? Because they do something, because they are a spoon, or they are, I don't know, something to hold a plate, or they are a real plate, or because they have, a symbolic value too. But they are replicas, and because you replicate them, you create value with them. I mean, you take the value of the unique piece that is in the museum, right? The special piece, the piece that actually don't have value because it's unvaluable, and you can replicate that, as Walter Benjamin will say, right? They lose the aura of being the piece of art, and it becomes they can be engineered and replicated in an industrial way, and they create value in other ways. Then we have that thing going on too there, right? The craft, the artesanía versus the piece of art here, and all these levels working together.
So,
we have.
yeah, we got a question from Susan. I felt that during the heist itself, the music did not always sound as it would have in a US film. Do you have thoughts on how music is used differently in Mexican films versus US films?
I mean, sound is an art in films. And I think we are, and I do have problems with sound in films because we are now too desensitized of the effect that sound takes on us as an audience, because it's so powerful that that we are expecting a sound to come to put us in the mood that the sound will, as like the cue to put us in that mood. And that's a problem because we are, we are just used as an audience on that all the time. And then I do have problems with many films and TV series and documentaries too, that, I mean, oh my God, they use this music because they know it's very effective. I think here it's not an issue that, I mean, this film is a actually quite important film with a very good budget, good production behind. I think here they are playing with something that is very different. They are playing with an aesthetic of the 1980s that I think is very purposeful, because the director did it in Güeros a little bit too. They were playing with something here that is, in this case, is the 1980s kind of aesthetic. If you remind, there's this international films in the 1980s, they have the dub thing. There's this, like, things don't match really well. They are like a little off. And it has an aesthetic value. Things don't match really well. Things don't really work really well. Things are like a little delayed, or there's a little scratch, and of course, probably that takes away the sensation that we want. We want it to be in the crescendo mood of the thing, and to see when just before the alarm, right, or something, or the shot happens. But here, nothing is going to happen, right? Because nothing happens. These guys go there, stay for hours there. There is, nothing happens, right? They just break things up now, take all these pieces and leave. Then there is not the necessity. And I think this is part of what they were trying to say. I mean, nothing really happened. Just go spend all this time doing this, and really nothing happened. Then I don't think it was a mistake in this case. I agree that many foreign films don't use these techniques, very sophisticated techniques of the use of sound. I know many directors don't use them because they don't like them, because it becomes like second nature, and you can manipulate your audience in ways that sometimes you don't want to go there. And some others, in this case, like Ruizpalacios, I think, is doing it very intentionally. Like it's a play of the aesthetics of the sound and the film itself. If you see it, I mean, the film is really, it's very careful. Every shot is very cinematic, right? It's very careful. All the scenes are really well done. And then you say suddenly, like, what the thing that I was saying about this like crime scenes shots, right? they are not really well done, but it's not because they cannot do it. It's because they don't want to do it. It's on purpose, right? They are breaking there. I mean, they are putting yourself. This is an independent film too. I mean, it has a little bit of that roughness of an intellectual film too, right? It's not a film. It's not a blockbuster. It's not Ocean's 11, 10, 12, 8, all the right. No, this is a one of a kind film. They cannot do Museum 2 or 3 like no, this is one of a kind because it's just a replica of something that happened. That's it. Then they can play with that. I mean, it's not play. They really think about it. Then yeah, I think that's my take. I can be wrong.
Elizabeth Stone is asking if the English subtitles accurately represent the Spanish in the original.
For me, it's very. I mean, I was so glad to see the film in Spanish. Of course, it came with English subtitles, and I cannot. I think it was well done. But for example, what I was saying about artesania and craft, there is a long tradition and a big intellectual investment on these distinctions between art and craft in Romance languages. And in English, craft and artesania, I mean, they don't really match. Then that's something that you cannot really translate. I mean, you translate it as a craft, but the connotation and the weight of the term at the moment in which it's placed, it loses a lot of it, right? But I think it was okay. I mean, it was well done. But yeah, I love to be able to watch the films in the real language. I mean, we grew up in Latin America watching American films with subtitles in Spanish. When they come, I remember watching Star Wars, the first one, with Spanish from Spain sound dubbed, and then watching it in English. And we said with I was already into films with my brother, and said, no, we cannot watch it with the Spanish. It was horrible. And for us, it's not difficult to watch films with subtitles. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself, drop it in the chat. We have about 10 minutes, 15 if we want to go over a few minutes over.
I wanted to know about Wilson. They called him Wilson.
Wilson.
I mean, it seemed more like an American name than a Spanish name. And so was there some thinking behind that they picked Benjamin Wilson or whatever for the second young man's name? I just found when they said Wilson, I'm going, what?
Yes. I mean, you're right. Actually, yes, it's interesting. Wilson is a very normal name in Latin America. I mean, I have one of my cousins. It's called Wilson, and we call him Wilson. No, Wilson. And but in this case, it's very purposeful because Juan is Juan, right, and Wilson, and in the real names are Carlos and Ramon, but Carlos was known as Charlie. But they reverse them in the film, right?
Okay.
Wilson is Ramon. Wilson is the one that at the end is free still, right? He's loose. We don't know where he is. But yes, it's a play of names. I mean, there's a beautiful film. The title of the film is Made Inusa, made in the US. And Marinus is the name of a girl in the film. And actually, it's a name that is common in many places in Latin America for girls, like Ladi, or instead of lady, or Miladi instead of my lady. Then yeah, there is just a play with the names here. But yeah, Wilson is the character that gets away, that has this emotional weight, very important to balance, you know, the more rough kind of adventurous, risky behavior of Juan.
Thank you.
You're welcome, JC. Anything else?
If no one else has a question, I want to bring up that scene with what is his name? The collector, Frank Graves, where he says, well, he says it in Spanish, no hay preservación sin saqueo, or something like that, which translates to there's no preservation without looting. So yeah, if you just want to talk a little bit about that, and maybe if you know, people want to also share their input on that.
Yeah, I was a cultural bureaucrat in my country for several years. I work in cultural policy in the Ministry of Culture for many years, and I still have many friends that still work on that. And the issue of patrimony is quite an issue for the countries of the South, much more than in the US. I mean, in the US, we have wonderful museums. I mean, please don't take me wrong here. I mean, it's amazing spaces. But I think the relationship is really different here, right? Because the erasure of this idea of patrimony here in the US is clear, right? I mean, we have this kind of revival of certain indigenous nations trying to reclaim their sacred spaces, but by the fact that in the North there were not this like big civilizations like in the South, the Incas or the Aztecs or the Mayas, and there is not this richness in terms of what is there in the land. Then there is this, I don't know, this drive of discovering to discover something, right? Is this drive for the treasure still present? And looting is part of that, right? I have a clear example right now. A couple of months ago, a group of indigenous peoples in Colombia, where I'm from, toppled down an equestrian statue in a little hill near a city, a colonial city in southern Colombia. And they asked them, why you did topple this equestrian statue? Something like very similar to what Black Lives Matter is doing here with Confederate statues, right? They're like taking down these stories of racism. And what they say, this group is called the Misak, they say we topple it down because he's on the top of a sacred hill, a hill in which actually is a pyramid. is a pyramid that in the 1950s was excavated by archaeologists. Actually, my great uncle, the brother of my grandmother, was the chief archaeologist in that expedition. And yes, we know that place is a very ancient pyramid, like a pre-pyramid because what they did is they built a little hill in which they placed, their tombs. It's a sacred space, but actually it's the tallest space near that valley in this city that is a colonial city. Then they were right. Actually, this is a burial ground. This is a sacred space. And as soon as this thing happened, a bunch of huaqueros, looters, had come to the hill, starting digging and see if they can find something, right? Because without looting, nothing can be discovered. It was very interesting. There is the black market for pre-Columbian art is large. It has been for centuries. There is lots of international lawsuits now by countries like Mexico, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, to try to recover some of their treasures that were taken away, and some of them are in the British Museum or in collections in Germany or in Spain or Portugal or other places. Because these pieces have a context, right? And the issue of identity is another issue that we didn't talk about, are very important, right? Museums are this symbolic space in which national identities, national histories, right, are somehow preserved and shared, and are important spaces in places that need to understand where are they coming from in order to understand where are they going to. And museums are very, very important spaces for that, right? They maintain that kind of symbolic identity, symbolic power. Then, yeah, is very present. It's very present. If you are in the circles of, if you are a subscriber of National Geographic, you will see that this is a drive that is still there, right? It's the issue of discoverment, right? Of finding treasures to relate to other ways of living, or our own lives of living in the past, are very powerful and are still there, and it has value too, right? Are people that collect those, want those objects, because they are valuable too, right? They are made of wonderful material, obsidian, right? And all sorts of jewels, gold, or all sorts of things, right? They have also an economic value that is important.
Ray has raised his hand, so go ahead, Ray.
I think that your question is good, and it gets back to, the dynamic doesn't have to be that way, where looters, have to discover these artifacts. I mean, it really goes back to like what societies, what value, and not just like, oh, we like our art or we like our history and culture. It's like, what value do we place on discovering that culture and really putting money into, like a public sector, or funding people who would go out and discover this stuff for us? Because it doesn't seem like there is a economic pipeline to really, that historically, certainly there wasn't, but, there wasn't a public pipeline, economic pipeline to make these discoveries. It was always just rich, people like discovering the city of Troy or Egypt or whatever, So it would be nice if we had I know some, I don't know, actual facts, but I know some countries like Greece, for instance, they do a lot of public funding towards that types of stuff on the Acropolis, for instance, and Vesuvius, Pompeii, and all that in Italy. But it would be really nice if our government kind of funded some of that here. But that would be nice.
Yeah, there is actually, North Carolina has a really interesting archaeological community, and there are actual sites that have been, on the works for many decades actually, and there's lots of things that we still don't know about the past. With this fascination of the future and this acceleration in the present, sometimes what is right there back there is not that important. And I agree. I think we do learn a lot of things from the past, and we should embrace a little bit more, like the Mayas. In the Mayas said that what we are facing, what we are facing is not the future, is not this idea of the future, but what we are facing is our ancestors, is the past. The only certain, the only thing that is real certain is what happened, and that's why we have to pay respect to our ancestors, because they were here before us and they taught us the ways in order to be here. That what is in front of us is the past, actually. That if we respect the past, we're going to be okay, right? Because time is not a linear thing. It's not an arrow through into space, but it's just a circular movement. We go back and back. Then I agree with that, Ray. Thank you so much for that comment.
Well, if no one else has anything else, I think this concludes our meeting of the NCMA Film Club. I know this was a really heavy film with lots of themes, lots of things we could have talked about for probably 2 or 3 hours. But, just being aware of everybody's time, and because it is a Friday night and we want you to enjoy your evening, you'll all be free to go. Thank you so much, Miguel, for your wonderful insight and the wealth of knowledge you just shared with us. And just before we leave, I want to let you all know that the museum is open. We have very strict safety measures in place, but if you want to go and look at some of our ancient America artifacts, we have them there. We have lots of paintings, lots of exhibits going on right now. We do have reduced hours or holiday hours. You can check our website for all of that. Thank you again for supporting this program. And I look forward to seeing you at the next NCMA Film Club. This is just a reminder that it happens the third Friday of every month. We actually have tickets on sale already for the January NCMA Film Club. It's going to be a Mexican documentary film called Takeda about a Japanese artist who's fantastic. It's a great film, and it's going to be moderated by our friends at Cine Casual. So I definitely invite you to come. And yeah, just a reminder that the tickets are free, but the space is limited, so please register as early, the earlier the better. And yeah, I think this concludes it. Have a wonderful and safe holidays, and have a good evening.
Thank you, art lovers and film lovers. Thank you for inviting me anytime. Loved it. Have a great weekend and happy holidays and safe holidays. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.